Thomas Harold was not born rich. He was born in a small town called Millfield, in a tiny house with a leaking roof and a broken front door that his mother fixed with tape every winter. His father left when Thomas was 4 years old. He never came back. He never even called. Thomas grew up watching his mother, Margaret, do everything alone. Margaret Harold was a small woman with soft brown eyes and strong, rough hands. She washed clothes for rich families. She cooked meals for the neighbors when they were sick. She sat up late at night sewing torn shirts and pants to sell at the market on Sunday mornings. She never complained. Not once. When Thomas was 7, he asked her, "Mom, why do you work so hard every day?" Margaret looked at him and smiled. She said, "Because you are worth it, my son. Everything I do for you." Thomas never forgot those words. He studied hard in school. He stayed up late reading books he borrowed from the library. When other boys were playing outside, Thomas was reading about business, about land, about buildings and investments. He had one dream, one burning dream that never left him, not even on the hardest days. He wanted to give his mother the life she deserved. By the time Thomas was 30, he had saved enough money to buy his first piece of land. It was a small, muddy plot on the edge of the city. Everyone laughed at him. His neighbors said, "Thomas, you are wasting your money. Nothing will grow there." But Thomas did not want to grow food. He wanted to build. He built a small apartment building on that land. Then he sold it and bought more land. Then he built again. Then again. And again. By the time Thomas was 58 years old, he owned more buildings and properties than he could count on both hands. He had a beautiful mansion on a hill with 12 rooms, a garden full of red roses, and a swimming pool that he never used because he had no time. He had offices in 3 cities. He had a team of 50 people who worked for him. Magazines wrote stories about him. Television channels wanted to interview him. Young people stopped him on the street and asked, "Mr. Harold, how did you become so successful?" And Thomas always gave the same answer. "I had a good mother," he said. "Everything good in me came from her." He brought Margaret to live with him in the mansion. She was 84 years old now, and her body was slowing down. Her knees hurt when she walked. Her hands shook a little when she lifted her teacup. Her memory sometimes played tricks on her, and she would forget what day it was or where she had put her glasses. But her heart was still strong, and her love for Thomas was still the biggest thing in the world. Thomas hired a full-time nurse for her. He got the best doctors to visit her every week. He bought her a soft wheelchair with extra cushions because she said the old one made her back hurt. He moved her bedroom to the ground floor so she did not have to climb stairs. Every morning, before he started work, Thomas would sit with his mother for 30 minutes. They would drink tea together and she would tell him old stories from when he was a little boy. He loved those 30 minutes more than anything else in his day. "You are a good son," Margaret always told him. "I learned from a good mother," he always replied. It was at a charity dinner that Thomas met Diana. Diana Whitmore was 43 years old. She was tall and graceful, with dark hair that was always perfectly styled and clothes that always looked like they came from the most expensive stores. She had a bright smile that could light up a whole room, and she knew exactly how to talk to people, how to make them feel special, how to make them want to be near her. Thomas was not usually a man who fell easily. He had been alone for many years after a difficult first marriage that ended when he was 40. He had told himself that he did not need love anymore, that he was too busy for it, that his work and his mother were enough. But when Diana spoke to him that evening at the dinner table, He felt something shift inside him. She was intelligent. She asked him interesting questions about his work. She made him laugh 3 times in 1 hour, which was unusual because Thomas did not laugh easily. Over the next 12 months, they had dinner together often. They went on weekend trips to quiet towns near the sea. They walked in parks and talked for hours about life and the future. Diana listened carefully when he talked about his mother, about how important Margaret was to him, about how he would never marry someone who could not love his mother like family. Diana always said the right things. "Of course," she would say, "family is everything. Your mother sounds like an incredible woman. I cannot wait to spend more time with her." But spending more time with Margaret always seemed to get delayed. Diana was busy. She had meetings. She had friends visiting from other cities. She had headaches. She had a cousin's wedding in another country. There was always something. Thomas noticed this. A small voice inside him said, "Something is not right," but he pushed the voice away. He was happy. It had been a long time since he was happy. He did not want to look too closely at things that might ruin it. After 18 months together, Thomas asked Diana to marry him. She said yes immediately. She cried beautiful tears and held his hands and said, "This is the best day of my life." Thomas felt proud. He felt lucky. He told his mother that evening. Margaret listened quietly. Then she said, "Does she love you, Thomas? Or does she love what you have?" Thomas kissed his mother's forehead and said, "She loves me, Mom. Stop worrying." But Margaret's words stayed with him that night. They stayed with him the next morning too, and the morning after that. Thomas was not a man who liked to play games. He believed in honesty and directness. He built his whole business on trust. But his mother's question had planted a small seed of doubt in his heart, and that seed grew slowly, day by day, until he could not ignore it anymore. He had seen small things, little moments that bothered him. One Sunday, Margaret had called from downstairs because she had dropped her book and could not reach it from her wheelchair. Diana was sitting right beside Thomas on the sofa. Thomas stood up to go to his mother, but Diana did not move. She did not even look up from her phone. Another time, Thomas had asked Diana to sit with Margaret for an afternoon while he went to a business meeting. When he came home, he found Diana in the garden on a phone call and Margaret alone in the sitting room watching television by herself. "How was your afternoon with my mother?" Thomas had asked. "Fine," Diana said. She was fine. She watched her programs. Thomas had felt a coldness in those words. So one Thursday, Thomas made a plan. He told Diana that he needed her to come to the house at 2 o'clock that afternoon. He said he had something important to show her. He also told his housekeeper, Rosa, that he would be hiding in the upstairs study and that she should follow a specific plan. Rosa Garcia was 40 years old. She had worked for Thomas for 5 years. She was a quiet, steady woman from a large family in a small village far away. She had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, and she worked hard every day to give them a better future. She wore a simple gray uniform and always had a warm word for everyone who came through the door. Margaret loved Rosa. Rosa always stopped what she was doing to check on Margaret. She remembered Margaret's favorite biscuits and always had them ready on a small plate. She talked to Margaret about her grandchildren and showed her pictures on her phone and listened patiently to Margaret's old stories even when she had heard them 10 times before. Thomas trusted Rosa completely. He told her the plan. Rosa looked at him with serious eyes and said, "Mr. Harold, are you sure about this?" "I need to know the truth," Thomas said quietly. Rosa nodded. "Then I will help you." That afternoon, Thomas hid in the upstairs study. He left the door open just a small amount, enough to see the top of the stairs and to hear everything that happened below. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Rosa opened the front door with her usual warm smile. Diana stepped inside, looking elegant as always in a white dress and high heels. She looked around the hallway and said immediately, "Where's Thomas?" "Mr. Harold had an urgent meeting come up," Rosa said calmly. "He sends his apologies. He asked if you could spend the afternoon with Mrs. Margaret. He will be home before 6. There was a silence. Thomas, watching from upstairs, held his breath. "I see," Diana said. Her voice had changed. The warm, musical quality it usually had was gone. In its place was something flat and slightly sharp. "Well, I suppose I can stay for a little while." Rosa led her to the sitting room where Margaret was waiting. Margaret was in her wheelchair by the large window that looked out over the rose garden. The afternoon sun was falling softly through the glass, making her white hair look golden. She was wearing a light blue cardigan that Thomas had bought her last birthday. She had a small book of crossword puzzles on her lap that she had not been able to finish because her hands shook too much to write. When she heard footsteps, she looked up. Her face broke into a gentle, genuine smile. "Diana, dear," she said warmly. "How lovely. Come and sit with me. Look at the garden today. The roses are beautiful." Diana stood near the door of the sitting room. She glanced toward the window and then at her phone. "Hello, Margaret," she said. Her voice was polite but empty, like a shop assistant reading from a script. "Yes, it is a nice day." She did not sit down. She moved to the far side of the room, near the bookshelf, and began scrolling through her phone. Margaret waited. She looked toward Diana and then back toward the window. Something moved across her face. Not quite sadness, but something close to it. Then she straightened her back and composed herself and turned back to look at her roses. Upstairs, Thomas pressed his fist quietly against the wall. 40 minutes passed. Diana did not ask Margaret how she was feeling. She did not ask about the crossword puzzle. She did not offer to help her fill it in or to read to her or to bring her a cup of tea. She made 2 phone calls. She laughed loudly during the second one. She walked up and down the length of the room twice, as if she was waiting for a bus. Margaret sat quietly by the window, watching her roses. At 3 o'clock, Rosa appeared with a tray. She had made a pot of tea and cut some of Margaret's favorite shortbread biscuits into small pieces because Margaret's teeth were not strong enough for the full ones anymore. "Tea time, Mrs. Margaret," Rosa said softly, setting the tray on the table beside the wheelchair. "Oh, Rosa, you are an angel," Margaret said, and the gratitude in her voice made Thomas's chest feel tight. Rosa poured the tea and handed the cup carefully to Margaret. Then she looked toward Diana. "Miss Diana, can I bring you something?" Diana looked up from her phone. "Just water. No ice." "Of course," Rosa said and disappeared to the kitchen. 10 minutes later, something happened that Thomas would remember for the rest of his life. Margaret was trying to reach forward to set her teacup back on the tray. Her hand shook a little more than usual. The cup wobbled, and then it slipped. It hit the tray, bounced sideways, and fell to the floor. It did not break, but the tea spread out in a dark stain across the cream-colored rug. "Oh," Margaret said softly. "Oh, I am sorry. I am so sorry." Her voice was small and ashamed. She looked at the stain on the rug and then down at her shaking hands, and a deep red color rose in her cheeks. "I did not mean to." Diana looked up sharply. She looked at the stain on the rug. She looked at Margaret's hands. And then she said, in a voice that was cold and impatient, "Rosa, come in here, please." She did not move from her place by the bookshelf. She did not say, "Don't worry, it's just a cup." She did not kneel down and pick up the cup. She did not take Margaret's shaking hands in hers and say, "It's all right, these things happen." She stood where she was and called for someone else to deal with it. Rosa came in quickly with a cloth. She knelt down beside the wheelchair without hesitation. "Please don't worry, Mrs. Margaret," she said in a gentle voice. "This rug has seen much worse. It will be perfectly fine." "I feel terrible," Margaret whispered. "You shouldn't," Rosa said firmly but kindly. "It was an accident. It could happen to anyone." She cleaned the rug quickly and efficiently, then stood up and collected the cup and the tray. "I'll bring fresh tea in a moment." As Rosa turned to leave the room, Diana spoke without looking up from her phone. "Make sure you get all of it out of the rug. It's expensive." Rosa paused. She turned slowly and looked at Diana. Then she looked at Margaret, who was still sitting with red cheeks and downcast eyes. Something changed in Rosa's expression. Upstairs, Thomas watched through the crack in the door, completely still. An hour later, Margaret shifted in her wheelchair. She had been sitting in the same position for too long and her back was beginning to ache. She also needed to use the bathroom, which was something that required help now, something that embarrassed her deeply, but which was simply the truth of her life at 84. She looked toward Diana. Diana was sitting now, finally, on the sofa across the room. She had put her phone down and was flipping through a magazine she had found on the coffee table. She had not spoken a word to Margaret in over 30 minutes. "Diana," Margaret said softly, "I am sorry to bother you." Diana looked up. "I need some help getting to the bathroom," Margaret said. "I wouldn't ask, but Rosa is in the kitchen and Can't you wait?" Diana said. Her voice was not cruel. It was something worse. It was impatient, inconvenienced, as if Margaret had interrupted something important, when in truth she had interrupted nothing more important than a magazine. Margaret blinked. "I don't think I can wait long," she said quietly. Diana sighed. She set down the magazine and stood up. "Fine. Rosa," she called toward the kitchen. "Rosa, come and help Margaret to the bathroom." Rosa appeared at the doorway. She read the situation in 1 second. She walked immediately to Margaret's wheelchair and took the handles gently. "Of course," Rosa said warmly. "Ready, Mrs. Margaret?" But before they moved, Rosa stopped. She turned her head toward Diana. Her voice was quiet and respectful, but it did not waver. "Miss Diana," she said, "Mrs. Margaret is going to be your mother-in-law. She is Mr. Harold's whole world. She is not a problem to be managed. She is a person. She is a mother. She has worked her whole life and loved her son and built everything that made him who he is. She deserves to be treated with care and with love." Rosa paused. "Not because someone is watching, but because it is right." The room went completely silent. Diana stared at Rosa. Her magazine dropped from her hand onto the sofa. "I beg your pardon?" Diana said, and her voice had gone cold in a way that suggested she was not used to being spoken to like this. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" "I am about to be the wife of Thomas Harold. You are the cleaning woman." Rosa did not raise her voice. She did not step back. She simply looked at Diana steadily and said, "Yes, I am the cleaning woman. And in this house, the cleaning woman loves this old lady more than you do. When Thomas hears about this," Diana said, "you will be finished. You will lose your job. I will make sure of it." "Then I will lose it," Rosa said simply. "But I will not stand here and watch someone treat Mrs. Margaret like a burden." And she turned back to Margaret and said gently, "Come on, my dear. Let's get you sorted." Thomas had been gripping the edge of the study desk for the past 5 minutes. He had heard every word. He had seen everything from the moment Diana arrived. The empty greetings, the turned back, the phone calls, the cold voice. The way she called for Rosa to pick up the cup without moving a single step herself. And now this, the sigh, the impatience, the threat. He stood up from the desk. He walked down the hallway. He walked down the stairs. His footsteps made no sound on the carpet. He stepped into the doorway of the sitting room. Diana had picked up her magazine again. She was standing near the window now, and she had her back to the door. She did not hear him come in. "Diana," Thomas said. She spun around. The magazine fell again. For one moment, surprise was written plainly across her face. Then, very quickly, she rearranged her expression into something softer, more familiar, more warm. "Thomas, you're back." She moved toward him, both hands reaching out. "Darling, I need to tell you something. Your housekeeper." "I heard everything," Thomas said. Diana stopped. "I was upstairs," Thomas said. "The whole time. I heard every word. I saw everything." Diana's hands fell to her sides. The warm expression was still on her face, but now it looked like a mask that was slightly too small, straining at the edges. "Thomas," she said carefully, "you have to understand. It has been a difficult afternoon. I am not good in these situations. I tried my best." "That was your best?" Thomas said. Not with anger. He was past anger now. He was somewhere quieter and sadder. "My mother sat by that window for 2 hours and you asked her nothing. Nothing about how she was feeling, what she was thinking, what she needed. She dropped her cup and you called for Rosa without taking a single step. She asked you for help and you sighed and called for Rosa again." He paused. "And when Rosa stood up for her, you threatened to have her fired. She was completely out of line." "No," Thomas said. "She was the only person in that room who was in line. Completely in line with everything that matters." Diana took a breath. She changed tactics. She put her hands together and looked at him with soft eyes. "Thomas, I love you. I want to marry you. I know I have not been perfect with your mother. I know I need to do better. But people can change. I can change. Give me a chance." Thomas was quiet for a moment. He thought about the past 18 months. He thought about all the Sundays Diana found reasons not to visit. All the times he made excuses for her. All the small moments where he had felt the coldness but told himself he was imagining it. He thought about his mother's question. "Does she love you, Thomas? Or does she love what you have?" "Diana," he said, "if I were not rich, would you be here right now?" She opened her mouth, closed it again. That small hesitation told him everything. "I think," Thomas said slowly, "that you love the life you imagine we would have together. I think you could be good at playing that role. But I don't think you love me, and I know you don't love my mother. And my mother and I come together. We always have. We always will." He walked to the side table near the door and picked up her handbag. He held it toward her. "I think it would be better if you left now," he said. For one moment, Diana stood absolutely still. Then something shifted in her eyes. The careful mask slipped, and underneath it was something real at last. Not love, not even hurt, just surprise that she had miscalculated. She took the bag. She left without another word. Thomas stood in the empty sitting room for a long time, listening to the sound of her car leaving the driveway. He felt many things. Relief was the biggest one. Rosa came back to the sitting room after helping Margaret. When she saw Thomas standing there alone, she stopped in the doorway. Her face showed a complicated mixture of emotions. Care, worry, the quiet, steady courage of someone who had done what they believed was right and was now waiting to see what it would cost. "Mr. Harold," she said carefully, "I'm sorry for what I said. I know it was not my place. I know I overstepped. If you feel that I should—" "Rosa," Thomas said, cutting her off gently. She stopped. You said something this afternoon that I will not forget for as long as I live, Thomas said. You said that she is not a problem to be managed. She is a person. Rosa did not say anything. I have spent nearly 2 years trying to convince myself that things were fine, Thomas said. That I just needed to give Diana more time, more chances. I made excuses for the things I saw and pushed away the voice that told me it was wrong. He looked down at his hands for a moment. And in 5 minutes this afternoon, you said out loud the thing that I had been too afraid to say to myself. Rosa looked at the floor. I don't want you to be afraid, Thomas said. You are not losing your job. You will never lose your job for standing up for my mother. Do you understand? Rosa looked up. You stood up for her when you thought it might cost you everything, Thomas said. That is not overstepping. That is character. That is what good people do. Rosa pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright. At that moment, Margaret's voice came from the hallway. Is someone going to tell me what all the drama was about? I heard a car leaving. Thomas went to the hallway. Margaret was in her wheelchair, her blue cardigan slightly rumpled, her eyes curious and sharp despite everything. He knelt down beside her chair and took her hands. Diana is gone, Mom, he said. She is not coming back. Margaret looked at him carefully. Then she nodded once, slowly. Good, she said simply. Thomas laughed. It came out louder than he expected. A full and genuine laugh. Margaret laughed too. A small, bubbling sound that made her whole face warm. You knew, Thomas said. I suspected, Margaret said. A mother always suspects. She looked past him toward the doorway of the sitting room. Rosa, she called. Come and sit with us, please. I want some company and I want tea. Proper tea this time with the good biscuits. Rosa appeared and smiled, a real wide smile. Right away, Mrs. Margaret. The weeks after Diana left were quiet ones. Thomas went back to work. He had meetings to attend, buildings to manage, deals to complete. But something inside him was lighter now. He had not realized how heavy the doubt had been until it was gone. And every morning, before his 30 minutes of tea with his mother, he found himself pausing in the kitchen doorway to say good morning to Rosa. It started as simple politeness, but slowly it became something else. Rosa would be preparing Margaret's breakfast and Thomas would ask how her children were doing, and she would tell him. Her oldest son, Marco, who was 17, was working toward a scholarship in engineering. Her daughter, Sophia, 13, had just started playing the violin. Her younger two, 8-year-old Leo and 6-year-old Anna, were mostly just being loud and funny and exhausting, Rosa said with a laugh. Thomas found himself looking forward to these conversations. Rosa was not like the people he usually talked to. She did not talk about money or investment strategies or market trends. She talked about real things, about the funny thing Anna had said at dinner, about the book she was reading to Leo before bed, about how she had sat up until midnight helping Marco rewrite his scholarship essay 3 times because neither of them was happy with it until the 3rd version. She talked about life the way someone talks about life when they genuinely love it, even the difficult parts. One afternoon in the 3rd week after Diana left, Thomas came home early from a meeting. He could hear voices coming from the sitting room. When he stepped inside, he saw Rosa sitting in the chair beside Margaret's wheelchair. Not cleaning, not working, just sitting. She had Margaret's old photo album open across both their laps and they were looking through it together. That is Thomas on his first day of school, Margaret was saying, pointing to a small black and white photograph of a very serious little boy in a too large blazer. He looks exactly the same, Rosa said, laughing. Margaret laughed too. Stubborn face. He had it from birth. Thomas stood in the doorway, unseen, and felt something warm move through his chest. Something much simpler and much more real than anything he had felt when he stood in this same doorway watching Diana. He stepped back quietly and let them talk. 3 months after Diana left, Thomas asked Rosa to stay late one evening. Rosa looked uncertain. She began to say something about her children, but Thomas said quickly, "I'll arrange a taxi home for you, and I'll pay you for the extra time, of course. I just wanted to talk." Rosa sat down carefully at the kitchen table, the way a person sits when they are not sure if they are supposed to be there. Thomas made the tea himself, which surprised her. He set a cup in front of her and sat across the table. "I want to know about you," he said simply. "Not as an employee, as a person. I want to know where you're from, what you dream about, what you want for your children, what you're hoping for." Rosa looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Why?" It was a fair question. "Because," Thomas said, "I have been surrounded by people my whole life who wanted something from me. My success, my name, my money. And I don't think you want any of those things. I think you're one of the most genuinely good people I have ever met. And I'd like to know who you are." Rosa wrapped her hands around her teacup. She thought for a moment. Then she began to talk. She talked for 2 hours. She talked about the small town she grew up in, where her mother baked bread every Sunday morning and the whole street smelled of it. She talked about coming to this big city alone at 25 with nothing but a suitcase and an address scrawled on a piece of paper. She talked about her marriage, which had been difficult, and her divorce, which had been painful but necessary. She talked about the 4 children who were her whole reason for everything. She talked about the cleaning job, which she was not ashamed of, which she was proud of, because it was honest work that paid honest money and it let her look her children in the eye. She talked about her dream, which was to one day open a small cleaning business of her own. Just a small one. A few good women and a proper van and regular clients who respected the work. Thomas listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not check his phone. When she finished, he said, "You should do it. The business. You'd be excellent at it." Rosa smiled a small, private smile. "Maybe one day," she said. "Why not now?" Thomas said. Rosa looked at him. "Because starting a business costs money," she said. "Money that I don't have." Thomas nodded slowly. "I could help with that," he said quietly. Rosa set down her teacup. "Mr. Harold," she said carefully, "I appreciate that, but I don't want to be a charity case." "It wouldn't be charity," Thomas said. "It would be an investment. I've built my whole career on knowing good investments. And everything I know tells me that you would take that business and make it exceptional." They looked at each other across the kitchen table. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Rosa asked. Thomas thought about this. Then he said, "Because you were kind to my mother. Not because you were paid to be. Not because I was watching. Because it was who you are." He paused. "And I think my whole life I have been looking for people who are what they are when no one important is watching." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "Someone important is always watching," she said finally, very softly. Thomas looked at her. "We are watching," she said. "Ourselves. We always know what we really are." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the rose garden was dark and still. Thomas thought that he had heard something important, something that would stay with him. Over the following months, something changed in the Harold mansion. It was hard to say exactly when it changed, but the change was real and visible and felt by everyone in the house. Thomas and Rosa talked more. They talked in the kitchen in the mornings and they talked in the evenings when she was finishing up. They talked about her children and his work and Margaret's health and old movies and good books and the small, bright, ordinary details of life. Margaret watched all of this with quiet satisfaction. She never said anything directly, but sometimes, When Rosa left for the evening and Thomas stood at the window watching the taxi pull away, Margaret would say something like, "She made wonderful soup today," or "Rosa's daughter played a violin recital last weekend. She showed me the video. Lovely child." Thomas would nod and say something ordinary, but he was always thinking about something else entirely. Rosa began to open her business. Thomas provided the startup funds as a formal business loan with proper paperwork drawn up by his solicitor. Rosa had insisted on the loan structure. She did not want a gift. She wanted to earn it. She called the business clean and bright. She hired 3 women she knew well and trusted. She bought a second-hand van and had the name painted on the side in dark green letters. She was terrified and excited in equal measure. Thomas helped her when she asked and stepped back when she did not. He understood the difference. Marco, her oldest son, got his engineering scholarship. Thomas heard about it on a Thursday morning and went to find Rosa in the garden, where she was trimming the rose bushes that Margaret loved. "I heard about Marco," he said. Rosa looked up. Her eyes were bright. "You should be very proud," Thomas said. "I am," Rosa said simply. "I am every day." Thomas stood in the garden for a moment, looking at the roses. Then he said, without quite planning to, "I don't think I have ever been as happy as I am right now." Rosa kept trimming for a moment. Then she stopped and looked at him. "Really?" she said. "Really," he said. "This house, my mother, your children running around in the kitchen, the business, the loan repayments, the van breaking down last Tuesday, all of it. I've never felt more like myself." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I feel the same way." They looked at each other across the rose bushes. It was very simple, and it was also the most important thing either of them had said to the other in 6 months of quietly falling toward each other without admitting it. That evening, Thomas sat with Margaret after dinner. The 2 of them had their tea as they always did. The evening light was long and golden over the rose garden. Margaret had her crossword book in her lap, but she was not working on it. She was watching her son. "Ask me," Thomas said. "Ask you what?" Margaret said. "The question you've been not asking for the past 3 months," Thomas said. Margaret smiled. She looked down at her crossword and then back at him. "Do you love her?" she asked. Thomas thought about this properly. He took his time with it. "Yes," he said. "Does she love you?" "I think so," he said. "I think she does. I haven't asked her yet." Margaret nodded. "Then you should ask her. But ask her the right way. Not a big dramatic thing. Not a restaurant or a ring yet. Just ask her. Talk to her. Tell her how you feel. Let her tell you how she feels." "I know how to talk to people, Mom," Thomas said. "You know how to negotiate," Margaret said. "That is different from telling someone you love them." She looked at him with her calm blue eyes. "Do you know the difference?" Thomas thought about it. "I'm learning," he said. Margaret patted his hand. "Good," she said. The next afternoon, Thomas went to the sitting room where Rosa was cleaning the large window that overlooked the garden. She had her back to him, working in long, smooth strokes across the glass. The afternoon light came through clearly behind her. "Rosa," Thomas said. She turned around. He stood in the middle of the sitting room and said, without any preparation or careful wording, "I am in love with you. I have been for some time. I don't want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable, and I absolutely understand if your feelings are different from mine. But my mother told me I should stop negotiating and start talking honestly. So that is what I'm doing." Rosa looked at him. She held the cloth in her hand, and she looked at him, and the afternoon light came through the clean window behind her. Then she said, "I have been in love with you since the morning you sat in this kitchen and made the tea yourself and asked me to tell you who I was." She paused. "Not who I worked for, who I was." Thomas let out a long, slow breath. "I didn't know if you could ever see me that way," Rosa said. "I am your housekeeper. I have 4 children. I have a divorce and a very small business and a van that breaks down. I have a very large house that echoes," Thomas said, "and a mother who is getting older every day and a heart that has been doing the wrong thing for too long. I think we could help each other." Rosa laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and surprised and happy. "I think we could," she said. They took their time. There was no rushing. Rosa kept running clean and bright, which was growing steadily. By the end of the year, she had 6 employees and 20 regular clients, and she was paying back the loan on schedule. Thomas had offered twice to write off the remaining balance, and she had refused twice. "When I pay it back myself," she said, "it will mean something." Thomas understood. The children moved into the mansion the following summer. It was the loudest and most chaotic Thomas's home had ever been. Leo broke a lamp on the first week. Anna decided that the swimming pool Thomas had never used was, in fact, the greatest thing she had ever seen, and spent entire Saturdays in it. Sophia practiced her violin in the rose garden in the evenings, and Margaret said she had never heard anything more lovely. Marco came home for weekends from his university and sat at the kitchen table with Thomas talking about engineering projects and city planning and how buildings could be made to use less energy. Thomas listened carefully and thought that this young man was going to do remarkable things. Margaret bloomed. That was the only word for it. She had been fading, slowly and gently, the way a candle burns down. But now the house was full of voices and laughter and children who climbed onto her wheelchair footrests and demanded she tell them stories. She told them everything. Stories about Thomas as a small boy, stories about her own mother's cooking, made-up stories about dragons and brave queens that she invented fresh each time with different details that made Anna shriek with delight. Her memory was still not reliable. Sometimes she forgot what day it was. Sometimes she forgot a name she should have known. But she never forgot the children. She never forgot Rose's face. And she never forgot that she was loved. They married in the rose garden on a warm Saturday in September. It was a small wedding. 40 guests, family and close friends, gathered on white chairs among the roses. Thomas had asked the gardener to make sure every single rose bush was in full bloom, and somehow, miraculously, they were. Rosa wore a simple ivory dress that she had chosen herself, and that cost a fraction of what Diana's engagement ring had cost. And she looked more beautiful in it than anyone Thomas had ever seen. Margaret sat at the front in her blue wheelchair, the same soft wheelchair Thomas had bought her with extra cushions for her back. She wore a pale lilac dress that Rosa had helped her choose, and she had small pearls in her ears that had belonged to her own mother. She was 87 years old now, and she was the most beautiful person in the garden. Rosa's 4 children stood in the wedding party. Marco, tall and serious in a dark suit, walked his mother down the grass aisle to where Thomas waited. When he placed his mother's hand in Thomas's hand, his eyes were bright. He nodded once at Thomas. Thomas nodded back. Sophia played the violin. She played a piece she had chosen herself, slow and tender and perfect. Anna cried, which surprised everyone including Anna. Leo stood very straight and serious in his small suit and then tripped over his own feet on the way back to his seat and made everyone laugh, which was perfect too. Thomas held Rosa's hands and looked at her face in the afternoon light among the roses. He thought about many things in that moment. He thought about his mother washing other people's clothes in a tiny kitchen so that he could have shoes for school. He thought about the muddy plot of land that everyone laughed at. He thought about the charity dinner and the woman who had looked perfect and turned out to be performance. He thought about the afternoon he hid upstairs and heard a housekeeper say that a good heart is something we choose. He thought about the broken cup on the cream rug, the moment that started everything. He thought that sometimes life sends you what you need through the smallest, most unexpected doors. "I love you," he said to Rosa. "I love you," Rosa said back. Margaret made a sound from the front row that was half laugh and half cry, and several people nearby turned to smile at her, and she did not mind at all. In the years that followed, the Herald House became something that did not have a name in English but that everyone who visited could feel immediately. It was home, not because it was large, which it was, not because it was beautiful, which it was, but because of the specific combination of people inside it who genuinely cared for each other in the unspectacular, daily, necessary ways that real love requires. Thomas still worked hard. He still went to meetings and made decisions and managed his properties. But he left work at 6 every evening now, not 9. And when he came through the front door, he listened for the sounds that told him who was where and what was happening, and those sounds were the best part of every day. Rosa's business kept growing. She hired a manager so she did not have to run every detail herself. She was talking about opening a second location in another part of the city. Sometimes in the evenings she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and her notes, and Thomas brought her tea and asked her questions about her plans, and she explained her ideas to him in detail, and he listened the way he listened to her when he first asked her to tell him who she was. Marco became an engineer. His specialty was sustainable buildings, buildings designed to save energy and work with the environment instead of against it. He called Thomas from his university sometimes to talk through problems. Thomas found that these calls were often the most interesting part of his week. Sophia finished school and got a place at a music college. At her going-away dinner, she made a speech that made the whole table cry. Leo and Anna were just themselves, loud and bright and growing. Margaret lived until she was 91. In her last 2 years, she needed more care than ever. Rosa was beside her for all of it, not because Thomas asked her to be, not because she was paid to be, but because she loved the old woman genuinely and completely. She read to her every evening. She sat with her when she could not sleep. She held her hand and talked about small things, about the garden and the children and whether the summer was better this year than last. Margaret told Rosa once, in a quiet evening moment, that she was the daughter she had always hoped to have. Rosa held the old woman's hand and did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "You gave me a family, a real one. That is the best thing anyone has ever given me." On the morning of the day Margaret died, she was in her bed with the curtains open so she could see the rose garden. Thomas was on one side of her. Rosa was on the other. The children were in the house, quiet and close. Margaret looked at the garden for a long time. The roses were in bloom. Then she looked at Thomas. "You found her," she said. "You helped me see," Thomas said. Margaret smiled. She closed her eyes. She went peacefully, in the house her son built, in a room filled with roses, surrounded by people who loved her. Thomas Harold had a small brass cup mounted on the wall of his home office. It was not beautiful. It was dented on one side from where it had bounced off the tray and hit the floor. He had found it later, after Rosa and he had been married for a year, tucked away in a storage box. He had kept it on purpose. When young people came to meet with him, young people who wanted to talk about business and success and money, they would sometimes notice the cup on the wall and ask about it. "Why do you have a dented old cup hanging on your wall?" they asked. Thomas always told them the story. All of it. The afternoon he hid. The woman who looked perfect. The housekeeper who spoke up. The broken cup that started everything. The lesson, he always told them, is not about love, although love is certainly there. The lesson is about attention, about who you are when you think no one important is watching. He would pause. "Someone important is always watching," he would say. "We are watching ourselves. Every choice we make when it would be easy to look away, every kindness we give when we don't have to, every time we stand up for someone who cannot stand up for themselves, we are either becoming who we want to be or we are becoming someone else. There is no neutral ground." He would look at the cup. "A broken cup showed me the truth about someone I thought I loved. And it showed me the truth about someone I did not yet know that I would love for the rest of my life." He smiled. "Some things that seem like accidents are not accidents at all. And then the young people would look at the cup differently. And sometimes they would nod, slowly, with the particular nod of someone who has understood something that will stay with them. Thomas always hoped it would stay with them. He always hoped they would remember it on some ordinary afternoon in the future, when no one important seemed to be watching, and they had a choice to make. And that they would choose well.